I'm Jeff Brindle, Executive Director of the New Jersey Election Law Enforcement Commission. I'd like to welcome you to our first in what we hope will be a long-running and ongoing series of interviews with individuals who have been instrumental in the success of the Commission. In the coming months and hopefully years, we will interview people who have been associated with the Commission as commissioners or staff, or have contributed to the Commission's role as having oversight over campaign finance and lobbying law, pay-to-play, and the gubernatorial public financing program. We also hope to interview individuals who have had an impact on reform in these critical areas, as well as remember those who have passed on yet have left a legacy worth memorializing. We call this the oral history of the Commission project. So with that, it is with pleasure to welcome our very first guest, Mr. Eric Jaso, who is the current chairman of the Commission. Eric received his bachelor's degree in government with honors from Harvard University and law degree from the University of Chicago. He is currently a partner at the law firm of Spiro Harrison in Short Hills, New Jersey. From 2003 to 2008, Eric served as Assistant U.S. Attorney in the U.S. Attorney's Office in New Jersey. Prior to that, as Assistant Attorney General of the Criminal Division at the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. He has also been Deputy General Counsel at the U.S. Department of Education, Associate Independent Counsel during the Whitewater investigation, and in 2011, served on the commission that redrew the boundaries of New Jersey's U.S. House District. In addition to being chairman of ELEC, he is also a public member of the New Jersey Urban Enterprise Zone Authority. He lives with his wife and son in Morristown, New Jersey. So with that, with your very impressive resume, let me ask you: is there anything that really stands out that was particularly gratifying or monumental, and all of those all that experience that you've had?
Well, I wouldn't say anything was monumental, but I do appreciate your having elevated me to Assistant Attorney General in the Department of Justice. I was actually counselor to the Assistant Attorney General, who at the time was Michael Chertoff, who I had worked with in private practice in Newark. Of course, former U.S. Attorney here in New Jersey, and then went on to become Homeland Security Secretary and also a judge on the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. And when I went to join Mike at the Justice Department, it was early in 2002. I had gone down initially to work, as you noted, in the Education Department. George Bush, having been recently elected president, you may remember No Child Left Behind, and he was going to be the education president, and that was going to be kind of where all the action was in Washington. Well, of course, a week, I was supposed to go to Washington the week after what ended up being September 11th, 2001, which was a Tuesday. So, first of all, I was delayed to go down there, but also I was ended up going over to DOJ, where Mr. Chertoff was now running the most important, arguably, criminal investigation in the history of the country, certainly in the last number of decades. So I was assigned to do primarily policy and legislation, but was part of the front office there right after 9/11, which was important work for all of us, and work that, having unfortunately been downtown taking a client to court on 9/11 in Manhattan, and having a front seat to what happened that day, it had a particular importance for me to participate in those efforts at that time.
Yeah, I mean, that must have been really upsetting, actually, being almost on the, with 9/11.
To say the least.
To say the least. I mean, what
Yes, not a good day.
Not a good day at all. Well, just to lighten it up a little bit, before we get into talking about the your involvement with the commission and the things that you're doing on the commission. I'd like to kind of get to know the personal side of people and so forth. Are there any, interests and hobbies that you have outside of your work that you're actually doing and have done?
Sure. As you noted, I have a son who's 14, and so with COVID, we spend a lot of time together. But I enjoy spending time with him and with my wife. We all play golf together, which is nice now that he's old enough to do it and like to do it. I enjoy cooking. I'm the cook in the family, so I enjoy cooking. And a lot of my Facebook friends enjoy seeing my recipes online because I prefer to post cooking things than political things most of the time. It's safer that way. And I've taken up in the last year or so biking, so I do a lot of road biking. So I've and COVID have, for a while it was all you could do pretty much. So those are kind of my interests. I play the piano as well.
You do? Oh,
Yes.
wow, that's interesting. Also, your son is also quite a swimmer, right? I mean,
He is, yes. He's a very good junior Olympian swimmer. Of course, the COVID has cut out racing for the time being. No meets, so they're practicing, but there's no meets, and time will tell. Whether they'll have timed meets, but it's not going to be the same as the classic eat my bubbles racing side by side in a pool. So hopefully, before too long, things will be a little bit back to normal.
Yeah, which the pandemic has really changed things. It's a whole new world almost. Hopefully, things do get back to normal pretty soon.
Yes.
Particularly so that we can hold some in-person
Meetings, right?
meetings here, right?
This is the first time I've
Yeah.
seen you in the flesh since March,
That's right. That's right.
or was it
Yeah.
February? Because we didn't have a meeting in March, right?
No, I guess we didn't. No, that was the
'Cause
first
that
meeting
was
that we
the-
held virtually. No, actually,
I think we
didn't
canceled.
have a meeting.
I think we canceled
in
March
March,
because
right.
that's when it hit, and then
Yeah.
April was our first meeting.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Okay, so you were named to the commission in March of 2017, and subsequently were appointed by former Governor Christie as the chairman of the commission, which you still are. And can you tell us what impression did you have of the commission when you first came on, particularly since that was the first meeting that we had in about a year, because in 2016 we didn't have a quorum and we couldn't really hold a meeting.
right.
So
Well, I know. I guess my impressions were the following. I'm old friends with Wally Timpone, who was also a former
Yeah.
assistant U.S. attorney. So I knew him through Mr. Chertoff and sort of through the bar, so to speak. And so I knew that he had to recuse himself, and that it had other issues, including just a lack of a four-person commission, which we still have, led to quorum issues. So, without going into empty confidences, this was the understanding that I was to, go in so that they could resume the business of the commission. My sense was that the commission was. I do remember reading in the newspaper about Sharp James, and the commission had taken action about misuse of campaign funds, I believe, for legal defense purposes. Right. And my reaction at the time was, well, Sharp James was mayor several years ago. He was convicted on federal charges, went to jail, and now is out. And only now is ELEC, at least from the newspapers, taking action. So, I don't think that's indicative of the commission, but it is something, as you well know, it's been a priority of mine to make sure, or to the best of our ability, even having survived a couple of years, I guess it was, without a quorum and unable to really take action, that we focus on what, for example, in the U.S. Attorney's Office, when Chris Christie was U.S. Attorney, he had a big focus on real-time prosecutions. That is, I don't want to see cases that are nearing the statute of limitations and have to be prosecuted for that reason because they lose over time. Unlike wine, they don't improve with age oftentimes. And I think that's true of all enforcement cases. I mean, if you don't have prompt, albeit thorough investigations and prompt and robust prosecutions of those people who do not comply with the law, particularly those who intentionally disregard it, you're not going to have a deterrent effect. Certainly not as much as when, it was someone who in the last election did this, that, or the other thing, or didn't, versus something that happened, 3 or 4 or 5 elections ago. So it's been one of my priorities to sort of get rid of the old cases and to focus on more, recent cases to have that deterrent effect, and to really give ELEC, more of a prominent and have its enforcement arm, which is only one of our functions, of course, have more teeth.
Yeah, now, of course, in 2016, we were able to issue complaints, but we weren't able to issue final decisions.
Right.
And just to pick up on what you were saying, talk a little bit more about the challenge in terms of getting rid of, some of these final decisions.
Well, we had a big backlog, of course, when I joined the commission, and we spent a lot of time. I remember, very large packages being delivered with a lot of cases, both big and small, that had languished for that period of time. So that was a challenge, and the staff, which does a very laudable job in a very efficient way, given the size of our agency, our staff really does a very efficient and effective job of putting together cases, investigating cases, presenting them to the commission, and then litigating them as necessary or settling them, which happens in most instances. So under your leadership, the staff certainly kept doing their work during that sort of interregnum, as it were, when we didn't have a quorum, and that made it easier for the commission, once it was reconstituted, to get caught up, so to speak, as quickly as we could with cases.
Has there been any case that stands out to you that we've dealt with since you came on the commission?
Well, there was the DiVincenzo case, of course. That was probably the most prominent case that the commission dealt with when I've been commissioner. I personally don't really like to comment publicly on cases. In some senses, I'm kind of like a parent in that all my children are beloved as far as the cases are concerned. But we take all, as you know, cases very seriously. I would say that the more the cases that I think the commission appropriately devotes more attention to are cases where there is, as I said, sort of an intentional disregard for the campaign finance laws. Where there's, for example, structuring of campaign contributions to stay below limits, including use of straw men or third parties reimbursing employees. If you're a corporation owner, reimbursing employees to make contributions below the limits of pay to play and so forth. Those are the kind of cases that maybe it's the former prosecutor in me, but those are the kind of cases that I think are the most egregious, and that we should and do treat more seriously. In fact, in some cases, as you know, when we detect, our investigators find criminal activity or potential criminal activity, we refer that to the appropriate authorities, usually the Attorney General's office.
Right. Now, as you know, one of the significant responsibilities of the commission is to administer the gubernatorial public financing program. And I think it might have been your first meeting or second meeting that we had to actually select debate sponsors. Do you have any thoughts? And that's something that is very important responsibility. Do you have any thoughts on that process?
Yeah, it was 4 years ago because it's almost next year's our gubernatorial election. My thoughts about that were, and again, I think it's telling perhaps, or that it was sort of one of my first meetings. But the couple things that struck me were that you had these presentations that were being given largely, if not, well, not exclusively, but sort of the loudest voices in the room were sort of the major network anchors and so forth from New York and Philadelphia. I recall at the time, having some concerns that New Jersey-based news outlets were a little bit given short shrift by that particular decision. I wasn't chairman at the time. Again, I had a vote, but I think that this time around, probably next spring when we'll revisit this, I think we'll want to, think more seriously and perhaps weigh more heavily the New Jersey ties of the potential debate sponsors. And I also think radio is an important outlet. It was very TV oriented. Maybe I'm just kind of old fashioned that way, but I think some of the best reporting in the state is on the radio these days. Frankly, that's New Jersey centric radio, and outlets like NJ12, public television, public radio, and so forth. So a lot of it we have to also consider, like how many people are going to see it. If there's an outlet that doesn't cover all of New Jersey, we have to consider that. So I think that we will take all that into consideration, but I wouldn't be surprised if we saw some somewhat different results. If indeed my fellow commissioners agree with how I weighed that question.
And say something about the commission, because it's really a collegial group. It's bipartisan.
Yes.
Democrat, Republican, but it seems to work pretty well.
I'm a holdover. The governor has seen fit to retain me, who's a Republican appointee and a Republican seat, as chairman. And the other two commissioners, Judge Simon and Judge Holden, are Democrats. We particularly Judge Holden and I think, tease each other about political matters all the time, but we really do. I've rarely recall an instance when we've had any kind of dissension as far as ultimate votes are concerned. We do disagree. Those disagreements are usually voiced in an executive session where we have a little bit of ability to more freely discuss our viewpoints, and the staff can weigh in and we can ask questions and so forth. But we do try to come to consensus, which apparently particularly is important because there's only three of us. So it's important, I think, to have a unified voice. So yeah, we do get along personally. We have a lot of respect for each other's views, and I like to think I conduct a meeting in a way that welcomes the voices of certainly not only my fellow commissioners, but also staff members, can weigh in, particularly in executive session, with their thoughts and their expertise, which is important because none of us, we have one former prosecutor and two former judges. Nobody's really an expert in campaign finance law. We rely on you and your staff to provide that expertise to us.
Now, this is a little bit off topic, but it's an area that is of great interest. In fact, and I'm not going to ask you about this, but there was on the ballot this year a question on redistricting. And there have been a lot of cases with regard to gerrymandering and so forth that have taken place throughout the country. And you were on the 2011 Redistricting Commission for congressional seats.
Right.
I'd like to really hear your thoughts on that. in terms of the whole process and in terms of, where we should be.
Well, I think that the lesson of the 2011 redistricting was that notwithstanding the very sophisticated process that they have, which really involves retaining vendors, typically who work for one party or the other, but who crunch numbers, electoral numbers down to the individual voters on a really like a street by street basis. That's important in the congressional redistricting because, of course, under the Constitution, as interpreted by the Supreme Court, you have to have equal number of voters or equal number of people living in each district down to the last person. So they use these supercomputers to move the map, but those numbers have to remain equal. So, people who had been working on for decades, they said that, back in the olden days, so to speak, even back to like the 80s or, when they had smaller computers and not these supercomputers, they would literally have to change one little piece of the map and then go like have lunch for 2 hours and then come back and, these recalculations happen in real time. And the way that it panned out in 2011 was that, there's an equal number of Republicans and Democrats that are appointed by the governor, I believe perhaps the Senate leader, and then other members of the Assembly and the Senate, if I recall correctly. And then there's 6 and 6, and then if they can't choose a chairman, then the Supreme Court justice, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, appoints one. And we ended up agreeing on John Farmer, former Attorney General, and so as a Republican, then it becomes whose map is going to quote unquote win. So we ended up with a map, until Van Drew changed parties, having been elected as a Democrat and decided to change to Republican down south. There was only one, after the last election, Republican congressman left in New Jersey. So, the experts can only go so far in predicting how all these things are going to pan out. They seem certainly very certain about how people would vote, but I think that, frankly, one of the benefits of the United States and the voter is that you're not predictable.
Right.
As we learned in the last presidential election, for instance.
Right. We're speaking with Eric Jaso, who is the chairman of the Election Law Enforcement Commission, and this is the oral history of the commission project. Getting back to the business of the commission, in terms of campaign financing, lobbying, going forward, what do you see as some of the issues that we're going to be dealing with as we go through this, next decade or so forth?
Well, as you very ably analyzed and publicized, there's been a huge sea shift over the last really couple of decades away from parties controlling political campaign finance and spending and so forth towards independent groups, some of whom are their donors are not publicized, and otherwise are supposed to not be working in cahoots with political candidates or parties, but I think in effect there are certainly no mystery, at least, as to which side some of these groups come out on. Indeed, groups that are formed specifically to run ads in a certain, say, congressional race or even an assembly race, as we saw last time with Steve Sweeney. So there's a huge change. I don't necessarily think I know we would disagree about this. I don't necessarily think it's a bad change. It's just, I don't think we want to go back to the days of the sort of smoke-filled rooms where unaccountable party bosses dictated who was going to be the candidate and what they were going to stand for and et cetera. But I do think there probably should be more visibility and transparency in some of the groups. We can disagree about the extent of that because I think there are serious First Amendment um, issues with, for example, revealing donor bases. I mean, some of the even, for example, recently with the death of Justice Ginsburg, she one of her early cases was to defend the anonymity of the donors to the ACLU.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, I think that there is transparency is good, but also I think that there is a long history going back to even the colonial times of anonymous pamphleteers who had a significant and appropriate political influence, and their voices had a political influence.
Yeah, no, those are all very good points. Yeah, now since you've been, as we kind of wind down on this interview here, since you've been chairman, there have been numerous changes and improvements, that we've continued to make to the commission. You want to talk to, and certainly your contributions with regard to that?
Well, I mean, I guess my contributions have been, deciding with my fellow commissioners to follow what you and your staff have promoted as modernization and improvements to the commission. So I can't say anything particularly was my brainchild, except perhaps in broad strokes, putting a little bit more teeth into our penalties and the way we calculate them, and trying to get our enforcement as effective as it can be, as I said. But certainly the modernization of filing system and the e-filing system, which was a huge task and one that went really swimmingly. In comparison to some other agencies like the Motor Vehicles Commission and others that have had much larger technological challenges, and much larger populations to serve. But nonetheless, we are sort of lean and mean agency, and getting the e-filing system put in place was a huge achievement. I think, frankly, some of the continuation of the focus on training and education, making sure that ELEC is in the public eye, and making sure that even as the person who commented today during our meeting publicly about sort of praising us, even though he was a person who advises and serves as a treasurer to campaigns who you'd think we would, we were happily, he was praising us and not complaining about us, despite the fact that we're the regulating agency
Right.
over his clients. So that continued effort to have people, human beings who answer the phone when people call or come in, the ability of the staff, frankly, during COVID to continue functioning almost seamlessly, remotely. Like I mentioned before, this is the first time we've sat down face to face. I've been in the office since March, and we're able to have commission meetings virtually. So a lot of the modernization, so to speak, has been forced upon us in these past few months, but we were very much ahead of the curve, I think, in making sure that we're as modern and efficient and responsive as possible, given our important role in the electoral process.
Is there anything else that you would like to add that I haven't asked about, or?
Well, I'm very pleased to be part of the leadership of an agency that is really a historic agency, one of the first, if not the first, of its kind in the country, that was founded in the wake of Watergate, and that serves such an important role in transparency and in making sure that the public and the press and others who are interested can get the information that is in many states unfortunately obscured because they do not have laws that require such transparency as we do in New Jersey, and they do not have entities and agencies like ours that do such an effective job both of educating people about what they should be doing and what they need to do to comply with the law, as well as effectively policing the enforcement aspect of those laws. So I think it's certainly a team effort. I'm proud to be part of the team, and I know that I can count on you during the duration of your tenure, which is now how long? That you've been with the
Too
commission?
long, I don't want to say. I think I started here in 1986.
So that was only
Yeah.
12 years after we were founded. So
Right.
so you're almost a founding father, but obviously it's not just you. It's a very, very dedicated
Absolutely.
staff. We have
Yeah.
very little turnover in the staff, which I think is a credit to your leadership and to the culture that has been established here over the years. So I'm proud to be part of that, and I look forward to ELEC maybe getting a fourth commissioner appointed before too long, and if the governor sees fit to leave me as chairman, then I'll serve for as long as he may please.
Well, thank you, and we're very happy to have you as chairman, and hopefully that continues.
Well, I hope that you've said early on that the only way that people leave the commission is either through death or being appointed to the judiciary. So we'll see how that pans out in my case.
Well, thank you for taking your time out. Your really busy schedule, I know from having looked at your biography and so forth. And it's been a pleasure interviewing you. And this is the oral history of the commission project.
Thanks, Jim.